All right, welcome again, everybody. So today I will share our experience implementing the Assaia Apron AI at the Port of Seattle. We'll share the approach we took, some of the challenges we face, and how we resolved some of the issues and avoided some of the risks. I am senior project manager with the airport and seaport here at the Port of Seattle. I have 30 years of experience in IT or ICT with a little bit over 20 years in project management. The last 20 years really spent at the Port of Seattle and working on airport projects. And the implementation of the Assaia Apron AI was part of a service area management system implementation. And the interest that you have in this topic is because either you are in the process of implementing the system or you are thinking about it and in the process of evaluating it. I will not be covering the Assaia functionality or the operations side of it. That will be a topic that if you are interested of next webinars in this series. So we will do a number of these webinars in the coming months, looking at the various aspects of the implementation of the Apron AI. Some of the topics that I would like to explore with you, if you are interested, is starting with the business case to doing the RFP for those who need to do an RFP, to the various aspects of setting up the statement of work and setting up the project planning aspects of it. So that will be part of the series. But today I will focus primarily on the approach we took to implement Apron AI as a project. I will provide first the type of stakeholders, universe or ecosystem that we have engaged. I will then share with you how we have divided the projects into different work streams and how we have engaged the stakeholders throughout the process or throughout the lifecycle project. I will then share an overview of the phasing that we have taken for the project. I'll conclude with some best practices and recommendations, and then we can conclude with the Q&A. All right, let's go ahead and begin. The first thing that we looked at is in thinking about the stakeholders, we looked at 4 classes of stakeholders that we engaged in the project. We asked the question, who will actually be using the solution? Who will need to be part of building it? And who will be supporting it once it is implemented? And who are the gatekeepers within the organization, internal or external, that have some kind of policies, procedures, or standards that we need to comply with? I will share with you who some of the main stakeholders are now. So for the solution for Apron AI, the users are going to be various departments of the airport. And then we have a number of participating airlines, among them Alaska and Delta were the primary airlines that adopted the solution. And then the FAA also. I believe that this is one of only 2 airports where the FAA has a system that is not implemented by the FAA. So the FAA actually uses it. The airport ramp tower also uses Assaia, and then ground service providers for the various airlines use Assaia. So this is from solution, who will use the solution, who will build it? Obviously, Assaia team, our internal information technology team or IT department, the aviation maintenance team were also participant, and then the team in the construction project management and for the setup of the power and communication infrastructure. Who will support it once it's in place? Aviation maintenance was the primary support team for the camera infrastructure and power and communication infrastructure. And then information technology was supporting the integration. This is a cloud-based system. Still, we do have integration with our internal video management system that required information technology to be involved. And then we have a number of other bodies, governance bodies that have different standards from architecture to electrical to mechanical and communication, and obviously the aviation building department as well, in addition to the IT architecture board. I will speak to the different aspects of the project that are touched by these teams or these gatekeepers. Next thing I want to share is the way we looked at the various work streams that need to be underway, sometimes in parallel and sometimes in a specific sequence. And I'll discuss each one in a little bit. So the first and most important one, obviously, is the user experience. This is the group that we mentioned who will use the actual solution. So from the user experience, these are, again, the airlines and the airport staff and ground service providers and so on, and the FAA. And this work stream focused on defining the user experience as well as the concepts of operations for how these teams are going to collaborate using Apron AI as a collaborative decision-making platform. Then we have the system architecture and system integration. System architecture, how is Assaia Apron AI, how is it going to fit in our technology ecosystem within the airport? And how is it going to play nice with other systems, such as our video management system? That's the integration part. And then how is the system going to integrate into our existing power and communication infrastructure so that we can plug the cameras, use existing cameras to feed the system? And then another track is the system configuration testing and training and making sure that the users are supported throughout the transition, throughout the change. And then I separate the camera installation calibration as a separate aspect, just because it's important to separate them from the power and communication infrastructure, just because there are different factors that we had to deal with, which made it important to look at the different stakeholders and the different players for each of these two separate tracks, the power communication infrastructure versus the camera installation and calibration and the training, the AI model. All right, so let's look at the first work stream. Here, as I mentioned before, we're trying to find out how is the functionality that is pre-built within Assaia, how does it fit out of the box, and what other type of events, for example, are going to be needed that were not part of the base package or the vanilla kind of version of the Apron AI. And this is where we brought the stakeholders to various workshops with our Assaia team, where Assaia team would walk through the functionality of the system and identify through discussions and through interactions that maybe perhaps there are different events or additional events that needed to be added. And we definitely had to add a number of events that were not part of the process that was in Assaia at that time. I believe that at the time when we started back in the March 2020, which was right at the beginning of the pandemic, I believe that Assaia at that point had only maybe one airport or two that had used the system. So we had to add additional events. I think by now the system has a rich functionality, a rich set of events, and much different and much evolved than what we started with in March 2020. The most important thing is that each airport is going to have their own kind of view as to what's important to them. And so this is the opportunity to bring in the various stakeholders and make sure that they are part of this process. What we did, which I think was one of the most important aspects of kicking off the project, was to train the users on this out of the box kind of version of the software. Train the core team who's going to be part of the project, so that everybody has the same understanding, have the same level of intelligence that everybody else has, so that when they are participating in the various workshops, they are able to ask intelligent questions, and they are able then to know what are some of the nuances for some of the decisions that they need to make. And so kicking off the project with getting everybody trained is a very important step that we did within our project. This training was provided to all the stakeholders that I mentioned. So from the airlines to the FAA to the Port of Seattle, various departments, everybody participated in this training and became fluent in how the system works and its various functionality and capabilities, so that as a Assaia team walked the team through different workshops, everybody had the same baseline understanding of the system. During the conversations around what is missing and what needs to be added, we called that the fit gap analysis and the requirements validation. We had a number of requirements that we put in the RFP, and this was procured as part of the RFP. During these sessions, we walked through those requirements and validated them, clarified them, as well as enhanced and expanded on them now that we understand more how the system works. And so out of that process, you should have a document that captures what are those requirements that everybody agreed on, and also what is the concepts of operation for how the various departments within the airport or the various airlines are going to be using the system. What are some of the processes and operational changes that will need to be made to incorporate the capabilities of the system and leverage them? Okay, so this is the first part of the project, the fit gap analysis, and more importantly, the core team training. I cannot emphasize enough the importance of this particular step. Okay, please stop me at any time if there are any questions or if I need to elaborate on anything specific. In the meantime, I'll keep going and then we can stop anytime you have any questions. Now, in parallel to the fit gap analysis, we kicked off the system architecture and the system integration design. This is where we have already did some vetting of the system architecture during the RFP process, during the vendor evaluation. And some of the questions that may have come up during that process that we couldn't finalize, this is the time where we will put some of the details on how this Apron AI is going to fit into our system architecture, from security, from single sign-on, for example, from the integration with our video management system, which is Genetec, and more importantly, having our information technology and information security teams and aviation maintenance teams that are going to be owning the system and supporting it at the end, have them ask the questions and capture the target architecture that the system will live in. And so at the end of this process where we develop the system architecture, we went in front of our ICT architecture board. By the time we got to the ICT architecture board, we have already vetted various teams within the IT department, whether it's a network team or the infrastructure team or the mobility team or the desktop team. They all have participated in the review of the architecture before we went in front of the board. We also identified the data flows between Apron AI and Genetec, which is the core system that we integrated with, as well as this is where we defined also the security and access requirements. Out of this process comes the system architecture document that was approved by our ICT architecture board, and also the interface control document for Genetec integration. And our team from Assaia worked with Genetec application programming interface or API, and there was a number of handshakes and handoffs between the two organizations until we arrived at the final design for how Apron AI will integrate with our video management system. All right. Now, in parallel to these two tracks or work streams, we kicked off work on the power and communication infrastructure and construction. The outcome, obviously, when we're done with this, we should have an approved design for all the new cameras and any changes that need to take place for existing cameras. There would also be a design for the physical and logical power and communication infrastructure. And again, we did this in an iterative way. So we started with a 30% and then we did the 60, 90, 100%, just like all construction projects at various airports are handled. Again, we go in front of different boards, the ones that I mentioned before, to make sure we get approval. And we also had to get some approvals by the FAA because we had to put some cameras on the FAA tower. Out of this process comes the power and communication design document that captures all the decisions that are made in this work stream. All right. Now, the next aspects of the project is this system configuration, testing, and training. This happens a little bit after we have clarified the user experience, clarified the system architecture, the integration. Then now our Assaia team translated all that they understood from us into specific changes to the Apron AI. We developed how we're going to test the system. So that's the user acceptance test plan. We identified what kind of training is going to be needed. So we developed the training plan. Training involved training the users, training the administrators, and training those who will be dealing with the cameras as our aviation maintenance or our electronic technicians or anything nuance that they need to know from a device maintenance for those cameras. So the deliverable out of this work stream, a finalized configuration of Apron AI solution based on the fit gap analysis and the integration requirements. User acceptance testing completed and the training is completed. And then finally, the final work stream is the camera installation and calibration. And this is integrating new and existing cameras into our Apron AI. So this involves not only installing new cameras, but also making sure that they are connected to our video management system. So all the cameras are connected to the video management system, and then those feeds are then transmitted or transferred to Apron AI via the integration done with Genetec. And then there's a number of steps to adjust the orientation as needed, and then for the Assaia team to train the AI model based on the unique nuance of the specific airport or gate. And then at the end of this is an integrated Apron AI with new and existing cameras. And this is an advice for other airports as well, is to put funding for the cameras as if you are going to be replacing most of the cameras that are existing, or that the cameras that are existing may not be suitable. We were lucky because we had already implemented SafeDock, the guidance system. And so SafeDock relies on a really powerful camera. And we were able to leverage that camera for a lot of the gates that we implemented Assaia in. So we were able to really leverage the existing infrastructure. I think we were very lucky to have had that benefit of having SafeDock. But from putting together the estimates for the projects and putting together the kind of the number of cameras, it's best to err on the side of needing to replace or to put new cameras. And then it would be great to find out good news that you can leverage some existing cameras. It's just that it's difficult to go back and get additional funding if you discover that the existing cameras are not going to be very usable. And honestly, since 2020, since we went live, I think in December 2020, most of the cameras that we are using today were already existing. We implemented very little. So all the benefits that we derived from Assaia was through existing cameras. And we are still in the process of implementing new cameras or installing new cameras. And that project is taking this long. It's literally, we implemented the system in March 2020, right? At the heart of the pandemic, we did like the core phase one in December 2020. And then we finalized with a second release in June 2021. We implemented a second phase of the Assaia Apron AI. And that's the version that's basically, or that's the implementation that we're working with today. And all of this time, since June 2021, we're working only with existing cameras, or that the cameras that pre-existed with that June 2021 implementation. Yes, and so it is a really big issue to get either new cameras or get existing cameras, especially some of the existing cameras have ownership by different departments, such as the security departments, safety departments, and we needed to have cameras that are going to be fixed. Nobody can touch those cameras. So we ended up funding all of the cameras that Assaia was going to need from the project. And I think that's a good advice to all airports or organizations, is to err on the side of overestimating the number of cameras and then celebrate the fact that you were able to leverage existing cameras. All right. So with that, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to just share with you how we sequenced these different work streams so that we can de-risk the project and mitigate any issues related to adoption, and especially from the end users, but more importantly, from the information technology as well as the aviation maintenance as well, just because usually you have some challenges getting the system to fit within the existing technology infrastructure within your organization. So you should see this diagram from a timeline perspective, just to show you some of the ways that we have sequenced the implementation. So first, what you will notice is that from the project kickoff, even though we started some of the work on the system architecture and fit gap and so on in parallel to the core project team training, I want to emphasize how critical that's first training of the core team is. Now, there was a number of training that we have done throughout the project life cycle. In total, we did 3 cycles of training, and I will explain those shortly. If you look at this area here, here we are focusing on the design. We are focusing on, again, the concepts of operations, looking at the system architecture, looking at the integration as well, making sure that we understand from a design perspective that this system can fit into our infrastructure and what changes need to be made to our infrastructure to be able to integrate the system, and what changes need to be made on the system side to basically fit. So this is what we do before we even begin to build the solution. Now, you can start some building in parallel to this architecture design and integration design, but this can serve as a replacement for the proof of concept. Usually when you're thinking about doing a proof of concepts for a system, you're not able to get the full engagement of the key and critical stakeholders in the project so that you can highlight or you can surface all of the challenges related to adoption, right? That's what the proof of concept doesn't provide you. The concept that a proof of concept basically proves, I think, is the least important concept, right? It proves primarily that the technology will work. But we know now that the technology works once you give it the right infrastructure and the right cameras. So the most important concept to prove is whether this system can fit into the technology infrastructure within your organization. And will your users adopt the system? Will they change the way they do business? Will they change their concepts of operations? That you will not be able to understand or surface or highlight from a proof of concept. And that's why I recommend that instead of a proof of concept is to initiate the project, but phase it the way that we recommend here, or the way we did it, which is start with this analysis of the requirements, look at the workflows, the different operational changes that need to be made for how Apron AI is going to be used, look at the system architecture, look at the training, who needs to be trained. And then you can also start on your design for your power and communication infrastructure for the cameras. You can do all of that without installing anything yet, without investing too much in the project, so that if at the end of this phase, which I marked here in green, so before you start the solution development, you can pretty much do the same thing as you would do in a proof of concept if you prove that the solution is not going to work. So you can stop the project. So this gives you the same benefit as a proof of concept, except that now, because you structured this as a project with specific phases and these points within the project where you can stop the implementation if the system is not going to work for you, you will have the benefit of understanding the full scale of the user adoption challenges. You will understand the full scale of the misalignment that exists within your technology infrastructure, within your power and communication infrastructure. It gives you this visibility. Then you can decide, okay, these are the corrective measures that I'm going to take. And so this gives you the same benefits as a proof of concept from the fact that you can stop the project, but it gives you much more intelligence. It gives you much more commitment of the end users because you have much better understanding of their resistance. You have much better understanding of their concerns, their objections, and you have the opportunity to address them during these workshops. You have the opportunity to gauge what are the pain points for the different entities that need to use the system. What are their pain points? And you're able to then understand them the same way you can understand what are the objections that your information technology team has, and what are the objections or issues that your power and communication infrastructure will present to you in the project. And then you can come back and you can say, what do I want to do now that I have this understanding? And you can structure the project accordingly. Now, with the benefits of that first phase, right? Now you can define this phase where you're going to start the solution, develop. This is where you're committing now to the requirements that you have gathered, to the concepts of operations you have designed. You now have what Assaia needs to be able to finalize the configuration of the system and build the integration with the different systems that you are planning to integrate with, including your video management system. This is also the phase where you're going to start developing the test plan and how are you going to accept the system? What are the criteria you are going to use to accept the systems? And then for Assaia team to be able to test that test plan, make sure that the system meets those criteria before you can actually start your user acceptance test in the next phase. And this is also where you can begin to develop training content. Assaia will help doing a lot of that, but the organization itself is going to need to take ownership of developing some of the training, or at least making sure they identify the specific needs that their organization has when it comes to the training, because they know their users the best. Now, remember that I said that there are multiple iterations of training. So remember this training that I mentioned called the core team training. This is to give you enough intelligence to be able to participate in the fit gap and in the different designs work streams. And again, this training is on the out of the box vanilla kind of standard version of Assaia. Now, when Assaia makes the changes in this phase here, the system configuration, it will be a different version potentially than the one you trained on here. And now, before you start your user acceptance testing, you should again train your core testing team to make sure that they are well prepared to be able to fully test the functionality of the system. This is a training that you should include before your final acceptance testing. And here, this phase here, it's called the start of the final acceptance. This is where you complete your user acceptance testing, you complete all the training, and you complete all your final deployment planning. And so you can see how this phase here nicely follows the previous two phases. And at this point, after you finish the training, you are ready to deploy. You're ready for the final deployment. And what we did here with our project is we gave our team about 30 days. We'll call it the performance and reliability period. you don't want this period to be undetermined. You want it to be finite. You want to have focus from everybody to use the system, to push the system, to make sure that the issues that were not surfaced during the user acceptance testing, because not all the components were functioning, you want to make sure that now that the system is functioning 100%, that the users are using it, they're pushing it, they're exercising it, they're flexing it to make sure that we surface anything that we did not catch during the user acceptance testing. Again, I cannot emphasize enough the importance of creating this constraint. You have to put a constraint on your project that this is a finite, limited period that we need to focus, identify any issues that will be resolved as part of the implementation, so that once we resolve those issues, we will hand over the system to the regular ongoing maintenance and support by Assaia, and then we close the project. So there has to be some finality to this. There has to be an end. Otherwise, what you're going to end up with is this attitude of this system is there and we're just going to take our time and the testing just goes on forever and we'll just deploy the system, but then we'll just decide when we're going to actually declare it, that it's actually live. That was not going to work for us. We needed to have clarity about what are the phases, what is the definition of done, right? And when we meet those definitions of done, then we're going to go live. And when we go live, there is a finite number of weeks. We give ourselves 30 days. We can negotiate this, but it has to be final, because this is how you're going to get people to focus and pay attention and be present, right? In these feed gap analysis, they understand that only things that were defined here are going to be implemented, and only things that are going to be implemented are going to be tested. And once we test things and again, testing has to be very structured as well. That's what we did. Once testing is completed, then we need to go live, because there should be no other conditions that should delay the actual deployment once we have the training done. And so this is how we were able to kick off the project in March 2020, and we were able to deploy it in December 2020. All right. And we had some additional functionality that we followed up in June of 2021, but that was planned as a phase 2 of Apron AI. So you have to have that clarity from the beginning. Now, power and infrastructure is a different story. This is going to be using this existing cameras. It's going to be installing new cameras. There needs to be a minimum viable set of cameras that need to be blessed as these are good enough for us to go live with, whether it's a number of gates, whether it's a number, especially a number of gates, that core number of gates that we can agree on and we can focus on in an early phase. They show here this process as iterative, because this camera installation is going to take longer than everything else. That's just the nature of construction, as if you work in an airport. But you want to have a minimum viable set of cameras that you can go live with, a number of gates that you can go live with, knowing full well that you will have tested the functionality of the system. You will have 100% confidence that the system works. But now it will be just a matter of sequencing the rest of the gates or the rest of the cameras in a rinse and repeat kind of process. You're not trying to test every camera, whether the system functions properly or not. You have already vetted that. So now you can allow this process to go on, and it could go on for long after the actual 30-day reliability can be completed. So make sure that this project is not an ongoing for multi-year because of the construction of the cameras. It would be important to define a set of cameras that once, or set of gates that once they are installed, you should consider that project is complete, and then future projects or future work will implement the additional cameras if that is how you structure it. All right, let me stop here. And I covered a lot of things, and I want to make sure that I address any questions or can make some clarifications of anything that I may have rushed through. Yeah, I think, and I have to double check this, but I think at one point we got to probably 70 or so gates that had good cameras, especially the fact that we have that safe dock, safe gates. So those cameras were very instrumental, and they gave us a large sample size of gates to work with, and that was good enough for our team to actually go live with the system and start becoming operational. So again, each airport is going to be different and probably not as lucky as we were, but I would say it has to be negotiated. So maybe I think that number of gates should be negotiated, a minimum viable set of gates. Because once you can prove the solution on, say, 10 or 15 gates, just from my own kind of just top of head, I think that the solution then will work as these other gates can be deployed over the coming months or over the coming years, just because of sometimes cost could be prohibitive to do a big bang approach. I have evolved this methodology over the last 20 years, right? So this is my methodology of implementing these complex systems that require user adoption, that require significant handholding, and a lot of working through the organizational, operational challenges and helping the organization move gracefully through that change process. To me, if you were to ask me, the most important phase of the entire project, this phase here where you're bringing all the airlines and the FAA and the ground service providers and the internal Port of Seattle teams. Like when I look at the organization, the project stakeholders from the port, you have all of these departments that are involved. You have the airfield ops, you have terminal ops, you have aviation safety management, cargo, airport communications center, airport planning and development, aviation security, financial reporting. Just within the airport, yeah, I have to make sure that my project plan and schedule and phases allow all of these folks to align themselves, right? To align their processes with this new system. And that's usually a rushed process because in a typical kind of or initial proposal for schedule from an entity that's not familiar with your challenges. You have also all these other entities within the IT and information technology and information security and electronic technicians, all of these different groups, different departments from all the integrators. So the point I'm trying to make is that you have to negotiate phasing for the project that will work for your airport and your organization. It has to be, because otherwise it's just going to be rushing through these phases. You're not going to know whether you're done or not, right? And you're already going to be rushed to start testing where you really have not gotten everybody on the same page. And so, yeah, so you have to force your needs when it comes to the development of the phasing of project and schedule. And again, we spent 6 months, not all that 6 months, because 6 months was also because at that point, there was no relationship between Assaia and Saab. And during that 6 months that I mentioned, there was also negotiation between Saab and Assaia team while we're also negotiating with Saab. So it's not all 6 months, but this phasing took the vast majority of the negotiation with Saab to make sure that we agree on what will be deliverable out of each of these phases, what will be the criteria for acceptance of those deliverables, and making sure that we have put in place these gates where we can stop the project. We have payment milestones associated with some of these deliverables and phases to make sure that we can take a step back if we see that the system is not going to work for us. So I hope I answered your question, but it's really a very challenging thing to get vendors in general to have to rethink the project from the perspective of what will work for the airport or for the organization versus what will work for the vendor. And we're happy to share with other projects. And that's maybe one thing that we can do as part of the series is to talk about the different aspects of the statement of work that need to be clarified, that reflect the needs of the airport. I think, to me, what I experience is that when I negotiate these statements of work, I tell the vendors these statements of work or this contract is more to be able to have my team understand what are our obligation. I'm usually not worried about the vendor meeting their obligations once we have a signed statement of work that works for both. But my attitude and my experience has been is that the statement of work is really to commit your organization to the project, that they are going to be actually invested in the project and going to bring their resources to the project. And so the contract negotiation part is very important aspect of the project. It is where you spend some time aligning everybody around what is it that we as an airport, we as an organizations will have to deliver and will be accountable for. And so it's important to negotiate every aspect of that statement of work to make sure there is a criteria for acceptance, there is a deliverable, and then there is a definition of done. And I think maybe I will cover, especially for those who are planning on doing a broader surface area management. If there is an interest, reach out to me. If you want us to do a webinar related to the kind of deconstructing or unpacking the statement of work that we use. Now, I wrote that statement of work, obviously in collaboration with Saab and Assaia team, but that statement of work I have evolved over 20 years, again, learning from many mistakes that we made as an organization in implementing these types of enterprise level solutions and complex solutions. So that is the basis for the contract and for the statement of work. But the framework that I'm sharing here, this framework is operationalized in the statement of work. I won't be able to show the entire agreement. Actually, I'm going to show just the statement of work. But what you will see with the statement of work is that it's very detailed. It talks about the overall project scope, project's objectives, but then it gets into what equipment and services provided by the port, what will be provided by the vendor. What I showed you in this diagram is operationalized here in terms of, for example, the phasing of the project, in terms of how we're going to do project planning, who's responsible for what. Most importantly, for example, things like the fit gap analysis for the core aerobond. So this language speaks to what will be covered, what Saab is going to be covering, and then it speaks to the fit gap for Assaia, for example, the fit gap for the integration. So the statement of work is very detailed. And then there's the power and communication infrastructure design. So it spells out really step by step how the project is going to unfold, so everybody understands their role. I want to cover one more thing and then I want to go back to the presentation. But there's like an example here is, for example, the power communication infrastructure installation and roles and responsibilities here, like test execution. So there is a lot of aspects that I highlight here in the actual diagram that are operationalized with specific language, like test environment setup and maintenance. That has to be spelled out. So to me, I'm a big fan of very detailed statements of work that spell out roles and responsibilities for the vendor. It spells out the sequencing of the phases. It spells out the deliverables, the outcomes, but it shouldn't be purely driven by the vendor. It should be collaborative creation and product for both entities. So we do have a framework that I can share with you for those who are embarking on this, because it's so important for you to take ownership of the development of the project approach, that you don't just take a standard schedule that worked for another implementation. You have to make it your own. And based on what we learned from SeaTac implementation, we can share more information about what worked for us and what didn't work. Those are awesome questions. I appreciate you sharing your experience and sharing your thoughts. Okay, let me finish by sharing some best practices. So some best practices. No stakeholder is left behind. So this is really something that you heard me focus on here, is that don't rush into getting those cameras installed and start working on the technical side. Sometimes the project will become only like about cameras, right? It's only about the installation of new cameras or changes in existing cameras. But the other tracks, the other work streams that we discussed are where you're going to have the most challenges. Eventually, the technical side is going to be worked out, but you could become consumed by focusing only on the technical side of the installation of cameras and proving the concept, that you actually may neglect bringing everybody else on board. And so that's very important, that you don't leave any stakeholder behind. And the approach that I recommended is that, again, you create this cadence where you bring everybody to design it with you, you build it and you have them test it with you, and then you train them on it, and then you deploy it with them. But then you create a constraint for them so that they know there is a time limit as to when this is going to be done. This project is going to be over when we meet these criteria. Engagement means ownership, which means all the entities that I mentioned, those who will use the system, those who will build it, those who will support it. You have to have people that are assigned to your project. What does it mean to be assigned? They have to be a core member of your project team. Maybe you can divide your project into core team and extended team, but representatives from these groups have to be part of your project. They have to be assigned. And the reason why we want people to be assigned, so that there is accountability, there is also ownership, right? So from the information technology team, I had to have people assigned to my project, right? I had to have a technical lead. I have to have an infrastructure ops lead. I have to have a client services. This is people that are going to deal with desktop issues, anything related to Assaia working on browsers. I had to have the service desk people. I have to have system engineer assigned, database engineer, and so on. They are assigned so that they can shape the project. They're not just there when we need them. They are there to review documents, to review designs, to be able to raise their hand and have objections, and so that you can deal with those objections as early as possible. The only way people are going to communicate objections is they are assigned to the project and they are accountable for the project. And so many projects tend to shy away from having people be assigned to the project, because then you'll have this overhead of having to engage them and involve them, attend meetings and so on. But the cost associated with not having people that are subject matter expert assigned by name to your project is that when you need them and you try to go and find them, they're not going to be available. And people are not going to be participating in your project if you only call them when you need them, because I will guarantee that you will call them in the wrong time. You will call them when it's too late. So everybody who's going to be doing something, creating something, installing something, setting up something, they should have been participating in the design of that thing. That's the principle that I recommend. Also, the guiding principle or practice is that the process of producing deliverables is as important, if not more important, as the final product. So I mentioned about the fit gap analysis document, the architecture document, the test plan, the training plan. All of those are opportunities to engage people in the process of producing these artifacts, but more importantly, again, so that they can have ownership, so that they can state what their concerns are, and so you can handle those issues, handle those objections. But more importantly, what you get is you get ownership. What you get also is that even if something is missing from that final product, because people feel they own it, they are part of it, they will fill the gaps when you need them. But when you don't include people in the development of these artifacts, and then you have them try to review it towards the end, or you try to have them execute that plan, but they have concerns and issues, they tend not to give you their discretionary effort. They tend not to go the extra mile, that they don't need to do that because you did not engage them. Again, the other thing is that resistance is better handled as early and as often as possible, not at the end. And the other thing that I think we run into often is that whether it's during the procurement process or during the construction process, is that sometimes there is this tendency for the procurement team during the RFP process and contract negotiations to want to dominate, to want to block you from being able to have free conversations and discussions with the vendors, to be able to be educated about estimates, about risks before you even create your RFP. Sometimes the cone of silence falls too soon, and we want that cone of silence to fall as late as possible. So we don't want to engage our procurement team until we are ready, right? Because once you engage them, they're going to want to take total control over your project. And that's going to limit your ability to be educated about the nuance that you're going to need to know, so that you can structure your project properly, so that you can estimate it properly, so that you can ask for the right amount of money, so that you can cover all of your infrastructure. So try to make sure that you understand the procurement process and that you deal with it in such a way that you don't become prisoner of it, because procurement teams are very risk averse. And once you engage them on the project, then you lose control. Same thing with construction team. Construction team are used to implementing these systems, installing systems. And so they're going to think that they're going to try to act as if this is a construction project because it involves lots of cameras, right? And your organization may end up giving this project to your construction team. And that would be a big no-no, because these are not construction projects. But if you give this project to your construction team, they're going to see it. They have a hammer, and everything about this project is going to be looked to them like a nail. And so this project is a business transformation project. The construction piece is a small component of it. And that's why I depict it here as just one swim lane. But if you talk to your construction team, none of these things will exist. These will be literally a one line in their schedule called maybe trim. That's exactly what happens in some of our projects that we give to construction team that are information technology or business transformation projects. And so be very careful about your construction project management team and construction teams taking over your project and turning it into a construction project, because that's going to be potentially very risky for you, because you will have all those cameras implemented. You will have cameras working great, but you may not have systems that is adopted by the users. You may not have a system adopted by information technology, and you may not have a system adopted by the people that are going to support it. And so those are some of the mistakes that we have made. In fact, the construction, to me, that was one of the biggest challenges, is to just have the construction team recognize that this is not a construction project. Have them understand that construction piece is just one element of the project. And we really struggled with this. And so if you can avoid this from the beginning by defining who owns the project and what is the role of construction in it, that's going to save you tremendous amount of headaches and pain and time. All right. And so with that, I have covered all that I wanted to share with you guys based on our experience. I stopped sharing. And I think we have a few minutes for open Q&A. I think we're going for another 10 minutes. If you have any questions on any aspects that I covered, as well as would love to hear what else you want to know, what else you want us to cover in the next iteration of these webinars. We're going to have a series of webinars. So first, let's start with any questions that you may have, or any experiences that you would like to share based on your initial work on this project, or initial definition or conceptual phase of this project, of the Apron AI implementation. I have not actually covered any specific technical issues that we ran into. And in thinking about our experience, I don't recall that there were any technical issues that we ran into. I think I do remember that we were planning to host the video kind of processing infrastructure in-house. We were going to host them in our data center. And we realized then that it would become very challenging for us to scale if we have problems with meeting the bandwidth requirements. And our IT department just did not want to take on that responsibility for having to constantly upgrade to scale if that becomes needed. So during that architecture discussions, we ended up changing where Assaia team hosted all that processing in the cloud. And we ended up working that into our architecture. And that came out of our architecture discussions. Again, our IT department, our IT team talking to Assaia, subject matter experts, and to mitigate this risk of scalability. And so that's one that I remembered most. Other than that, there has not been anything that we did not resolve during the architecture. We had some challenges, not challenges, but we like to have participation of the third party that we're integrating with. And Assaia had their subject matter experts ready, but we couldn't get Genetech to assign people to our project. They want us to just work with their support team, use the APIs, use their programming interface, their application programming interface protocol, and then reach out to their support team if there are any issues. Eventually, that worked out. I think we had a number of give and take until the Assaia team finalized that interface. The other issue that we found that we worked through is on the Genetech side. We needed to set up Genetech from server. I think it was during an upgrade. And so our Genetech is under the responsibility of our aviation maintenance team. So we worked with our electronic technicians, and Assaia worked really well with both our ICT team and worked well with our aviation maintenance team or electronic technicians. And all of those technical issues were addressed and resolved. But I don't recall of any technical issues that really blocked us or impacted our timeline. Okay, with that, let's keep the channels of communication open. Reach out to me if you would like to have a webinar about a topic that is of interest to you. We can talk about, we can talk about functionality if that is interesting to you, on how we are using the system operations and the benefits we're deriving from it. If you would like to talk about that, we can do a webinar about that. If you are embarking on RFP because you have to do an RFP, then I have done the RFP for SeaTac and I can help you with that. If you are working on the business case, I have done the business case for this system. We can help you with that, or we can do a webinar on that. If you would like guidance related to sequencing the project, given your unique environment, given your unique organizational structure on how each organization is different, I will be happy to provide you with guidance. Reach out to me. We can schedule a webinar specifically for your team that addresses specific challenges that your organization is facing. Basically, we want all organizations that can benefit from this system. We want them to get this system as soon as possible. And we want you guys to not make the same mistakes we made. We also want you to avoid the challenges we face. I think we had a really great and smooth implementation, except for the installation of the cameras, as I mentioned, which we are still working on. So reach out to me if you have a very specific topic you want us to cover. If you have very specific needs that you would like us to talk about, do a specific webinar to your team. Basically, the information is available and we would love to help, and you just need to reach out. And with that, have a
Ahmad,
great rest.
really
Yes,
sorry.
go. Whoa, hi, yes.
Oh, thank you. Sorry. I recovered from my technical glitch. I just really wanted to thank you very much for the generosity of your time and your candid sharing of your experiences. I think this has been very useful for everybody. And as you said, we'll reach out, follow up and see what other sort of topics everybody would like to hear from. But really, from all of us at Assaia, thank you so much for taking the time and the initiative to do this.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Louise. And thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of the day, and we will talk to you guys soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you.